Okay, good evening everybody and welcome to this evening's Overview and Scrutiny Committee meeting. The time is 6 o'clock. The town hall clock is 2 minutes too fast. So there it is. According to the iPad, it's 6 o'clock. So, good evening. First item on the agenda, minutes. Do I have your authorisation to sign the minutes of this scrutiny meeting held on the 22nd of September 2025 as a correct record of those proceedings? Okay, happy? Yep, cool, thank you very much. Apologies and substitutions. I don't think there's any substitutions.
We have an apology from Councillor Byrne.
Councillor Byrne, okay, apologies from Councillor Byrne and Councillor Thomas, and the Vice Chairman is joining us online because he has singing to do later, so I'm told. She cannot be in two places at once. I think that's it, and there's no substitutions. Additional agenda items, there are none. Disclosure of interest and dispensations. Looking at it, I wouldn't think it would be too many. Anybody? No? No? All quiet? Okay, going on to that then. Delaware Pavilion Trust Performance Update. Welcome to Stuart, Sally Ann and Patricia. Anna's going to introduce the report and then Stuart's going to give us a talking to. So, Anna, over to you.
Thank you very much. It's my pleasure to introduce Stuart Drew as the Chief Executive and Director of the Delaware Pavilion. You'll have seen Stuart's report. Stuart has got a presentation that I'm going to share with you all. It should last about 15 minutes, and then there'll be about 15 minutes-ish for questions and answers afterwards. So without further ado, I will introduce Stuart and try and share my screen.
Thank you so much. I think it's my second time in the chamber this week, or in the last 7 days, so it's good to be back with you. Great to see planning go through last week for the master plan. Just wait, tell Anna, are you all good? Excellent. So. Excellent. Let's go to the first slide. So I'm Stuart Drew. I'm Director and Chief Executive of the Delaware Pavilion Charitable Trust, and I'm joined by my two fellow directors as well this evening in support. I just wanted to start here on this first slide. Is the sound okay for everybody? I can hear it back at me a little bit. I wanted to start with this first slide, just to kind of remind us all, myself included, that of course a lot of the time we're talking about artistic programmes, art exhibitions, performances, and the building itself, the bricks and mortar. But ultimately this is about the community of the district and the wider region, and being very focused on particularly those things that are brought to the fore, particularly from things like levelling up funding, looking at levels of deprivation, particularly in Bexhill Central and Sidley and further afield, looking at life expectancy dropping, looking at average wages dropping, GVA, and the number of NEETs, the number of young people not in education or employment. And I just wanted to very firmly start by saying we are very much focused on that. And we are very much focused particularly on your investment and the investment from Arts Council on those outcomes as we go forward. So really, really critical to start there. As I said, I'll do that for next slide, shall I?
Next slide.
Next slide. As I said, it was really brilliant to be here for planning last week. It was really incredible to see a kind of clean slate in terms of no public comments or objections, thanks to the support of the planning team here too. Thank you very much. but also to get that really brilliant support from Historic England, 20th Century Society, highways, etc., all those consultees. It's a very ambitious scheme to reset the Delaware Pavilion, and it's really brilliant that we can now start to move forward with the delivery of it and move into delivery phase. One of the most critical parts of that, and talking about the community, is this new Southwest Community Studio, which is adjacent to the lawns and the seafront. It is the repurposing of our offices into a 100 capacity venue and replaces the community space to the northwest corner that I affectionately call the education space round the back by the bins. And it's where we put all our young people, it's where we put Bexhill Art Society, and it's really not that great a space. It does us well, we do lots of things in there, but actually the development of this site and the linking, or the being able to link with events on the seafront and the colonnade in the longer term and all those kinds of things is really brilliant. So this is in phase 2. I'll talk a little bit about the phasing, but it's a really exciting moment to get this through, as I say, with no comment through planning. As we know, as many of us know, the Delaware Pavilion is the mother of UK art centres. This is the Royal Festival Hall on the South Bank, directly related to the Delaware Pavilion. So Delaware Pavilion gives us the South Bank Centre, the Royal Festival Hall, the Barbican Centre, and all those many wonderful art centres in the UK. And really the interior of our auditorium and the way that our auditorium works should look rather like this, rather splendorous like this. And so again, we're really pleased to be working with Howard Tompkins, who've done the National Theatre, the Old Vic, the Young Vic, the Liverpool Everyman, for which they won the Sterling Prize, and to be working with such brilliant architects to actually get that investment into that auditorium, which is the powerhouse of our community, of our district, and in terms of viability for the auditorium too. I mentioned the phasings. It's just useful to be clear about the phasing. We're currently poised to try and deliver phase 1, which is the kind of light green section, which is the auditorium and the foyers. We are waiting for a relatively significant Heritage Fund grant, which we should hear about in December. And then we have about £3 million worth on top to raise. But now that we've got planning, we can move forward with that fundraising going forward. The lighter green to the west end is that community studio and upgrades to backstage. And then the red area is phase 3, which is the east end of the building, the cafe, and the galleries. But we're very much poised to push forward to deliver the whole lot as we go forward and to deliver in phases. Again, just to remind us that this is about a conservation reset, community learning and skills, environmental and sustainability systems for the auditorium, trying to knock that Grade 1 listed building into shape in terms of its environmental systems, and it's also about business viability. There was a bit of discussion at planning about the business plan. Through Heritage Lottery funding, we have spent the last year developing activity plans for heritage activities for the community, a very robust business plan, an access plan, an archive plan working with Bexhill Museum, a fundraising plan, a digital plan, the list goes on, an accessible transport, sustainable transport plan that went with planning. So we're in a very good position where we've got all the documentation and all the plans in place to move forward. There's a number of slides actually which we looked at last year, but I think are really important to look at again. This is the revenue funding, and this is the revenue funding model that was set back in the early 2000s that secured the last set of capital funding from lottery. There is a really strong equilibrium between Rother District Council and between Arts Council England. that was set up originally. They do very much go together. I think that we've seen in other areas where there's been a lack of investment from the local authority or from a lack of strategy from local authorities. This definitely isn't Rother District Councils, but some not too far away. But there's definitely been issues with viability and further investment. And that brilliant package that was set some 25 years ago has set us in very good stead. It's very solid and it attracts investment after investment into our district as we go forward. Next slide, please. It's also just working out all our business models have changed, particularly post-pandemic. These are actually increases. These are actually £500,000 worth of increases since the pandemic. So energy costs are currently sat at about 130k in excess of pre-pandemic levels. We're all seeing rises in national insurance, which has risen by 70k. The repairs increased despite the capital project have gone up by about 150k. And living wage continues to fuel inflation and rising costs at about another 160k on top. So at the moment, we're currently spending that £500,000 from Rother largely on increased costs as we go forward in terms of the pavilion. And of course, moving forward with the capital project, it's there to look at some of these challenges and try and reduce these costs. But we know that costs have risen. Just briefly, we can see that energy costs have dropped from their peak. In fact, at one moment, the energy costs were almost the same as the Rother grant. They've actually kind of slightly halved in that period, and we hope that they will come down further. One of the first things that we will do next year is also put solar panels on the roof of the auditorium, which was part of the planning application. So starting to implement those environmental systems as we go forward. The other thing to look at is just to look at what's been unlocked as a result of your investment. In terms of skills funding, we're delivering a £900,000 skills programme with Brighton Dome, Brighton Festival, right across the region, of which Bexhill and Sidley are a focus of that funding, delivering creative careers advice to young people, working with the schools and the colleges. The development fund for Heritage Fund was just over £200,000. In this period that we're reporting on, general fundraising was 300k. Creative Sidley, which was a programme that was funded privately by SB Fairburn, is just over 200k. The original auditorium upgrade for lighting, LED lighting and PA system was just over £400,000, and commercial profits in this period were just over £300,000 as well. So a significant return on investment. So what's pending? Currently what's pending is just over £20 million worth of investment into the region. Heritage Lottery stands at just under £8 million and is on the brink. A decision, as I say, is due in December, and we really need to stand firm of the confidence of Rother District Council and Arts Council England to secure that money. The team are currently working on an Arts Council bid for just under £10 million to help deliver that community facility that we saw at the start. Those funders will want to see security in partnership funding from the local authority. And the fundraising plan as it currently stands is seeking to deliver £3 million worth of investment. And that's before we've started to look at phase 3. So that's to just get us through phases 1 and 2, which are the really essential things. So we're at a really pivotal moment here. Again, I think we've looked at this before, but it's worth just looking at that return on investment. That levelling up bid for the pavilion has unlocked £60 million worth of levelling up funding through LUF, LUPs and through the neighbourhood board, which is coming through in partnership with Rother District Council, and as well that £1 million worth of investment for Beeching Road Studios as well through Local Growth Fund. So I think we work really well together in terms of securing income. So all the stats and figures are in a fairly full report, which I'm really happy to take any questions on. Our visitor numbers are currently sat just below 360,000 visitors. 41% have travelled more than 30 minutes. It's really important that we get those visitors from further afield. They spend more, they eat in our restaurants, they stay overnight. 10% visited for the first time, 11% stayed overnight, if you can find a room, and over 70,000 visitors buying tickets to auditorium shows. The 687 events overall is always a figure that I have to go, really, and is always something that Patricia directly manages. But in addition to the 100 performances, the 9 exhibitions, there is events happening all the time, some of which you don't know about. We're just rigging for the big NHS Awards tomorrow, which is a private event for the NHS, but is recognising all the NHS workers in this region. So lots of events going on all the time with a good net promoter score for those events as well as we go through. Just in context with the visitor numbers, and there's a mistake on this slide, but you can see the visitor numbers just slowly recovering post-pandemic. They're nudging up every year. We also have to look at this in an environment where there isn't as many events going on in the town. There's less investment into tourism right across the region. So it's really trying to fight in terms of our programme to push those numbers back up to pre-pandemic levels. It very much puts us on a par. V&A Dundee should read 360,000 visitors, not 3 million. I'd like to see 3 million go through their venue. But that is pretty much on par with us. So we are pretty much on par with a regional V&A. That is a free venue, so that's very much comparable with us. Tate St Ives is 176,000, but you have to pay to go through the doors, ticketed venue. So just to give you a bit of a flavour. I think in Anna's report that went in front of ours, she made a note that the engagement and learning has really skyrocketed. I think that's two things. I think that's one, us putting much more emphasis on that post-pandemic for various reasons. I think it's also the schools and the community groups really realising that absences from schools, mental health, well-being, the arts are really coming into their own through that period. So these numbers are pretty much double what they would be pre-pandemic, and are significant numbers of people coming through the Pavilion's learning programmes and our outreach programmes, and that's right throughout the district as well. You'll see there's big long lists of schools as we go through. More specifically, and this is an additional number, just over 8,000 engaging with the skills programmes. So again, this is a real focus for us. We see this as a kind of real investment area from government's industrial strategy that's coming through, and we know that it's a theme for the Mayor. So we would like to see a lot more funding and work with you to secure a lot more funding for Bexhill and the wider Rother region as we go forward. There's huge opportunities here. We are one of the only institutions delivering these kinds of programmes together with Brighton Dome right across the region. It's a very specific set of skills, and it's trying to broker career paths between education and creative industries as we go through. So it's starting to be very successful and nationally recognised as a programme. It's worth just pausing. Sally posted this picture on her Instagram over the weekend, and it's a very telling picture. To my right is somebody who grew up in Bexhill, who went away, managed national PR for lots of performing arts venues, ended up at the Perrier Awards in Edinburgh, and then has come back and dedicated the last 25 years to the Delaware Pavilion and really building the Delaware Pavilion up. But this is somebody from Bexhill. The gentleman in this picture is Joseph Constable, our head of exhibitions. He's just left us for a director role in Norway, a very nice directorship in Norway. He too is from Bexhill, went to Bexhill College, worked at the Serpentine Galleries in Hyde Park, had a really lovely job, and then came to be head of exhibitions at the Delaware Pavilion, delivering a really innovative programme for our community. This is where we want to be. It was always my dream that our head of exhibitions, which is a tricky post for us to recruit, is somebody from Bexhill. So that is really exciting. It's a really exciting point. We'll just flick through some slides, but it's just good to see like the kind of volume. These are week in, week out creative engagement programs that are taking place both at the Pavilion in Sidley with our partners in Sidley, and it's great to see the community hub in Sidley underway, which is really fantastic news. Out in schools and creative areas, working very closely with Flatlands and Beeching Road Studios, but further afield too on those creative career programs. Again, working right across the region with schools and schools performances. And we're really pleased. I'm honoured to be chair of Create Music, which is the music hub for the whole of Sussex, where we're providing education, music education, to nearly 6,000 people right across the region, but also making sure that that provision is provided in our districts as well and across our districts as we go. So these are really meaningful partnerships. I mentioned Joseph. Joseph's left us with the rather amazing Betty Parsons exhibition, which has been featured in the New York Times, Harper's Bazaar, 4 stars in The Guardian, 4 stars in The Independent, delivered by a Bexhill boy, and really attracting visitors. It's a really important moment to be attracting visitors into the town and to support the wider economy. Of course, we were also privileged to host Brit Awards performance by Rag and Bone Man. This is an artist that previously would have cost us about £100,000 to book for the Pavilion, coming for free to support us with a high impact event. Royal Philharmonic Orchestra, we're talking about doing some really special things for Bexhill next year, under wraps, but exciting. And then supporting bands like Kid Capici and Hot Wax, who are emerging local bands but breaking onto national TV and breaking nationally. We're really making an impact. I'm just going to finish just by kind of looking at opportunities and threats really for the organisation. The opportunities are really clear, really. First and foremost, they're there to kind of help safeguard the heritage asset and to continue the investment both in Bexhill and in the district. To improve commercial opportunities for the Pavilion directly for Bexhill, but the wider district too. And to give us an improved visitor economy and wider economic impact across the town at a time where the visitor economy and destination management organisations are changing radically. Improved community wellbeing and skills impacts, going back to that original slide, and looking out for opportunities, outlook for our communities, wages, life expectancy, etc. And definitely the opportunities, even though that we know we're going through LGR and devolution, but still keeping our eye out, we know in a period of change, there's still the opportunity for further investment. And I think we can continue to secure that as we go. In terms of the threats, they're quite interesting. We're still seeing kind of building defects and reputation. We need to get on with that capital project and deliver that capital project. We know we've got direct challenges. We know that there's pressures for us in terms of our risk assessments on funding pressures, the loss of funding and the loss of strategy. Strategy and funding are really important to keep us going with wider investment. The equilibrium of Rother and Arts Council, if Rother might cut, are the Arts Council going to cut? Are we going to see a spiral there? Some interesting conversations about charging for entry through the planning process and the planning consultation process. It seems to go really against Earl Delaware's kind of vision for the pavilion in terms of being a social and a civic space for Bexhill. It's really interesting. We look very closely at Hastings Contemporary and some partner organisations across the region, saying that that entry charge on the front door is a real barrier to entry, but essential to pay the bills, shall we say. So we need to look at that very carefully. There's a very real risk of putting Heritage Lottery at risk at the moment, that 7.6 million of not securing the Arts Council funding that we need for capital investment. And the fragility of the pavilion as we go into a capital funding round, as we go into the capital build, it makes organisations very vulnerable, not only for us, and I was looking at some of the comments over the weekend on social media, just about the nervousness of the town, and it's our intention to try and keep trading, to take partial occupation of the building while the building works are going on. But there is a real nervousness. Trading is very challenging in the town and across the region, and actually not having the right funding to continue to programme and keep the lights on will not only have effect on the pavilion, but also on the wider town. And of course, we're watching that wider LGR. I've spent a lot of time working with local government at both tiers and with the local enterprise partnership. So we've got some pretty good relationships and understand how that works and how that's going to develop. But as I'm sure it is for you and it is for us, it's a big time of uncertainty, kind of mixed in with what I think is a recession well, maybe one war is over, I don't know, is it? But watching what's going on globally as well and how that impacts customer behaviour as well, because we've definitely seen a change in customer behaviour. I think I was probably slightly longer than 15 minutes. Apologies, Chair. I'm really happy if we've got time for questions, to take any questions from the presentation or report.
Yeah, thank you very much, Stuart. Yeah, no worries about going over a little bit. It's a difficult sort of thing. I don't want to put it wrongly, but you're the biggest cost to this council almost. So you're the biggest sort of grant we give. So we have to, you can't gloss over it. We need to sort of discuss it properly, but not for hours, if you know what I mean. Mary, Councillor Barnes.
Well, hello again. It was interesting, Stuart, because at the beginning of your 50 minutes, you sounded really positive about what it was that we were all going to help you by supporting. And gradually, as we sort of went a little bit further down the line, one or two things came to mind which caused me a bit of concern. Can you just explain the role of the Arts Council and, in fact, where we are with them? Because I see now that we are possibly going to be looking at further pulling back, are we? Because they are doubtful about how we can keep money rolling in. Is that correct?
Thank you for the question. So Arts Council, just to recap, I think have always been quite critical in a project like ours. And I think the formula that was developed for us actually is predicated across the region in one format or another. But the original agreement was that there would be match funding between the local authority and the Arts Council. And at that point, it also secured the lottery funding, the capital investment, as we went through. Now, the two grants are independent, but as I say, there is a real confidence in the grant, in the proactive grant from Rother District Council, in the way that the council's always been very strong in that area, in the way that it's backed the pavilion for culture-led regeneration. And what happens with Arts Council is the funding runs in cycles, which are usually either 3 or 4 year cycles that we have to apply for. We run a risk in applying for them that we might not get the funding, we might get less, we might get more. But to be honest, what we try and do is always over-service funding, because we appreciate the level of funding and always try and over-service. Arts Council will have certain agendas, as will yourselves, of certain things they'll want us to deliver. So it's being attentive to that, to what the current, as you were, mandates from government are that we need to deliver on, and make sure we're attentive. What's interesting with Arts Council in this period is that they're proposing 2 extension years. So actually the funding will run for 5 years through to 2028. I think largely because there is some element of uncertainty, and also they went through a very big shake-up of what they call the portfolio a couple of years ago. Where it's useful for us is just to watch where the capital funding is, because I think if there's cuts to revenue funding during the building work itself, I think that will be incredibly challenging for the organisation, both financially in terms of delivering for the town and for the district as we go through.
Just come back on that. Is it true that the Arts Council also help you engage some of your class acts? And at the back of my mind, there's a sort of an idea that in the early days of the Delaware, this is what happened. But I just wondered, when I asked you what the role of the Arts Council is it these days purely a fund-giving body?
I think the role has changed over the years. I mean, I would say that it's still supportive and strategic in supporting what we do, and we'll make introductions. I mean, for example, the £1 million or almost £1 million worth of skills funding was strategically negotiated with Arts Council. We had to apply in an open format, but was part of a discussion with them, of them going, well, this is a really innovative programme. We'd like to try and find a way of supporting you. So there is a conversation. They've also helped us, again, strategically with the capital programme. The initial £400,000 grant really gave us a springboard, as it were, to start the fundraising right in the very beginning.
Chairman, there are other questions I'd like to ask, but I'm happy to let somebody else have a go.
I'll go on to Councillor Clark.
I've been visiting Delaware since the 1970s. I remember when the cafe was downstairs when we first moved to Bexley. A few comments I'd like to make. I've got friends in Hastings, and they come over to Delaware because they feel that your programme events is far more diverse than the White Rock. And they feel that your programmes are far more embracing and more interesting. When you have a top pop band, can't always get a ticket because they're gone the same day, aren't they? Because it's so popular. It's a shame that we can't increase the seating in Delaware, but no, we can't do it. I'm sure you could fill in more people, you know. And also, I was absolutely amazed by the amount of activities you're doing within the community. That's a pretty difficult job to coordinate all that. You must have a brilliant team behind you working to deliver all that activity for the schools, all the other activities. It's got to be organised, doesn't it? It doesn't just happen, does it? You know, so my favourite concert last year was Paul Simon Gracelands with a gospel choir. It was absolutely fantastic. And if you can rebook them, I'll be really thrilled. Thank you very much.
We have.
Yep, go on, Stuart.
I just wanted to say that I find some of what's gone on in Hastings really interesting, particularly with the White Rock and Hastings Contemporary, because there is a lack of revenue funding for those venues now. And when it's commercially led, you get very different programs and viability in terms of those programs. So I guess it's just the balance that one makes and the decisions that you make on a commercial basis.
I will go Councillor McGurk for now.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I think it was a year ago, Stuart, you were here and we had a conversation, and I invited you, I think, to engage in Rye, and I think you had engaged in Rye and Winchelsea, the sort of eastern side of the district, but it just wasn't necessarily reflected in the report at the time. And I think it was not long after that, I think it was you, Sally Ann, I saw it, Rope Walk on a very cold day doing an outreach programme, and it was great to see you and your colleague there at the time. And so it's just to say thank you, you know, for acting on that invitation, and because you also generously gave your time. I asked you if you could support some meetings for the Rye Creative Centre. You did that on a few occasions, and also engaged with what became the Green Waves Festival in Tilling Green. And I don't think there was anything that came of that this year, but hopefully next year. I was talking to a couple of guys behind that, Dan Lake and Graham Ellis earlier, and I think they just really needed to find their feet and their identity is what they were saying this year, but hopefully next year that partnership can develop a bit more. So that sense of outreach and inclusion right over to the eastern side of the district, in Rye and Winchelsea, and there's mention in your report of St Thomas School in Winchelsea and also Rye College this time, which is great to see. So yeah, just to say a genuine thank you, and it really makes a difference, that outreach, that sense of belonging to, rather benefiting from such a great asset as the Delaware, like Councillor Clark. I've enjoyed a few concerts there, and it's just a great resource, so thanks.
I'll go Councillor Burton, and then I'll have Councillor Barnes, John.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. So I too am here from last year and growing in my understanding of the work that you're doing there and the very wide remit that you cover. And certainly as a battle councillor, I need to flag up, you know, you are for the district, and because there isn't really a comparative report of what happened with the schools and that, I can't really tell, like I don't have evidence that my colleague has to say, well, you came to battle for this. So maybe battle could be on your list this time next year of attendance. I've had a couple of comments from Rother residents about the content of your exhibitions and saying that they'd like something a bit more everyday rather than the quite very, very artistic is the way I would describe it, that some of the stuff you're doing. But maybe they haven't tried hard enough to appreciate what you've got on offer. And my final comment, and I don't know whether you'd had any thoughts on this, is you know, you're obviously a big organisation, and your increase in your what was it called? Tax increase was substantial because of the large team. But I notice you only quote that you've got 21 volunteers, and I wondered if you were thinking about trying to expand that in the future, because it's a big organisation and there's a lot of people who love the Delaware Vision who might not be able to support you financially, but may be able to do more with their time. And I appreciate the volunteer is not a freebie. You know, there's a management issue, a cost.
Thank you. So just briefly, I think I've almost spent 10 years as chair of 1066 Country, and spent a lot of time in battle. So I think there's always this thing when not necessarily every detail is recorded in the report. We're obviously very mindful of the rural areas and those areas outside Bexhill, but I think as Councillor McGurk would testify, that on a challenge last year, we presented a really full report about Rye, and also kind of the realisation that some schools don't want to engage with us as well, and Rye College was one of those partners that really we kept trying and they wouldn't engage, but we kind of come together and made that happen. So we work extensively throughout the region and strategically through previously things like 1066, but also those programmes and those being available. So we've always worked really hard on that. I can feel Sally kind of twitching with regard to the kind of volunteers question. I mean, I'm slightly in two minds about volunteers, because I think within a community like ours, it's really important to pay people and not expect people to do things for free. But having said that, what we have got is a very large volunteer programme through Heritage Fund. So if we manage to secure that money, there's actually over £1 million worth of programming for the community centred around heritage, and actually that instance where Sally was out in Rye and out in the wider community was doing a consultation to actually ask people what they wanted. And as part of that programme, there is a big cohort of volunteers and a volunteers manager. So to try and give that balance, as I say, I'm very keen that it fits well with the skills programme and paying people properly and all those kinds of things. So it has to be an ecosystem. There was a third point, wasn't there, that I've forgotten. What was your third point? Oh, about the exhibitions. Yeah, I see the programme as a balance. I really loved, there was a really brilliant comment on Facebook recently that said, why the heck doesn't the Delaware Pavilion ever show anybody from, any artists from Bexhill in the main galleries? And there was Michelle Roberts sat in the first floor gallery, nominated for a Sky Arts Award, showing neurodivergent person's work, who's very much part of the Bexhill community. So I think if you look carefully, that programme is varied. It is there to kind of challenge and entertain us, and it is a balance with the live programme. The live programme can be very accessible, the learning programmes can be very accessible, but we also, for instance, with an artist like Betty Smith, we've had lots of visitors from the States over the opening weekend. So it's also our duty to bring people into Bexhill to spend their money in the town and the wider region. So it is a balance, but I hear you, and I think we will adapt as we go through the building works. The programme will evolve. Thank you.
Thanks, Stuart.
Thank you. John Casabarnes.
Yes, I'm always impressed by how much you are achieving. But I'm also slightly worried that the visitor numbers are taking time to recover. I find myself explaining still out in the far sticks, because I'm up in northwest Rother. Two things. First of all, the positive things about you, but also that if the Delaware is not a success, then we would be likely to end up paying more than our half share of the grant. I think that's right in terms of the default option if the charity is not a success. And it worries me, therefore, that 2028 is beginning to loom up as a rather big date where Arts Council funding extended comes to an end for the moment and will have to be re-provisioned, that we come to an end in 2.5 years' time. I don't know whether any thought has been given to the shape of the charity, whether there needs to be some way in which you secure both Bexhill and wider representation, with the clout to sell this to the new unitary authority. The whole thing, I think, is going to look quite wobbly for a few months in 2028. And I'm really glad that we've got the capital programme rolling forward in good time, so that it'll be well advanced by the time this happens. But I just wonder whether the charity and Rother shouldn't be giving some thought to its structure going forward, because with the best will in the world, I don't think we're going to get quite the same interest from the unitary authority, even if they could afford to do so, which I suspect they won't, that we've had over the last couple of decades since we established the charity. So I'm sorry to sound a bit like Cassandra, but I think actually we do need to take a long, hard look at how we get through that troublesome period and what the future structure of governance looks like. Because I'm pretty sure the unitary is going to start bankrupt. And that is not the best background in which the ambitious programme that we all favour here is likely to find quite as much attention as it should.
I think on that positive note, would you ever dig deep and try and find an answer to some of that, Stuart?
I've got the number for Weatherspoons. I think it's a really good thought. I mean, I personally, and you can see from my presentation, that we're in a really sweet spot. We're in a really sweet spot that we've worked with Rother to develop. That doesn't mean the challenges that you're highlighting aren't real. I think what is important, I think sometimes what we lose sight of is that Rother District Council is the custodian of a really important A, piece of architecture, and B, arts centre, the original arts centre for the UK. And I think what's interesting is talking to colleagues, Brighton Dome, Brighton Festival, Chichester Festival Theatre. There are a number of institutions across Sussex which are facing similar challenges. What we need to do is to get the viability of the business model in the right place, and hopefully the capital programme will. But there is still a viability that this is a publicly funded service. It's not set up to be a commercial business per se. It's commercially minded. It runs off fundraising, commercial income, charitable raised income, and the revenue grant. And I think we need to have a really serious conversation about that. And I think we need to have a serious conversation with the Mayor and the unitary authority as we go forward. And I know that Lorna has been looking at models too as we go forward. Maybe Lorna wants to comment on that. But I think we do have to position ourselves as a major institution within this region and look at institutions like Brighton Dome and Chichester Festival Theatre to make sure that we get the right deal. I also think it's potentially really important, I've been talking to Lorna about this time, that we position the pavilion in the right place and we don't start to kind of undermine the funding or the model before we move forward with those kinds of conversations, because people will lose confidence.
I'm glad to hear, Chairman, that thinking is going on. Two things rather more positive that can be done, and I hope are being done, but there was singularly little mention of social media in Stuart's presentation, and yet that is, as the media fragments, I think social media are going to become more and more important, and particularly TikTok at the moment, if you want to reach the younger generation. It's quite amazing to me, the discontinuity between the media world that we knew it 25 years ago and the media world now. On the other hand, there are still some pluses we're missing. Out in the sticks, most people now have e-bulletins. We in Etchingham have a daily one. It has almost 1,000 readers, and yet very little about the Delaware ever appears there. Burwash operate their own e-bulletin, it's much less frequent. But I think we could do a lot more to promote the Delaware in the northwestern parishes, and that probably means also promoting it right across the High Weald, because this is, you're quite right, this is actually, I think, much more important than the Chichester Theatre, but it's up there in the same national league, and we don't quite regard it as that in our own local area, which seems to me a failure somehow of marketing. I'm not quite sure how you crack it, but I think it's very important that we find ways of doing it so.
Thank you. I'm just conscious of the time. We've been going on for probably 45 minutes now. I don't know if anyone else has got any sort of pertinent points they want to make. Or Laura, yeah, you want to come in on the funding potential?
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to Stuart and Sally Ann and Patricia for being here and that presentation. It was really insightful, actually. I just wanted to say that I think we all know how important our funding is to the Delaware, and it is something we're going to have to look at. But I think Councillor Barnes is absolutely right that the new authority probably will find it hard to fund the Delaware in the same way that the District Council has. I think we all know that. And just to say that I have been working very closely with Stuart and the board to come up with a solution. Don't quite know what that solution looks like. That's what we really need to focus on now, a creative solution to make sure the financial sustainability of the Delaware goes beyond the life of Rother. But we do see that as a huge priority. And we will keep you updated. I can't really say any more at this time because obviously it's a decision for the board as well as Rother, but we're looking at options, and you know, I think there's a real onus on us to find a solution for the longer term. It was a bit of a shock when the LGR decision, we didn't even know about it this time last year, so we haven't had that long to think about it, but we are working very closely together. So I hope that's slightly reassuring. Haven't quite got the solution yet, I don't think, Stuart, but we are working on it.
I think it's probably difficult to even sort of work towards a solution. We haven't got a solution to ourselves yet, have we? until probably December, January, whenever the minister makes a decision, is when you press the button and you know which direction of travel you're going in. At the moment, you're sort of, who knows? Are we 3 unitary authorities or are we 5? Who knows? So we don't know. I can't help thinking that you owe me 20 minutes of James Bond music from last year, because when I went to the concert, some silly sod had a medical episode, and we all got chucked out early. So, Stuart.
Sorry to respond to that. I think we might do. What was interesting about that event actually is the team genuinely resuscitating somebody, and the extraordinary things that kind of, to a lot of people, go unnoticed. And I think that week my team resuscitated 3 people from heart attacks, including that event. And I think the feedback from that event actually gave us a lot of kind of social capital actually, and a lot of friends, because I think people realised the seriousness of it. I must say that gentleman came in the following day and asked for his programme, so he recovered very quickly, but he had a major heart attack. It's quite interesting. If I may, Chair, just finish off with Councillor Barnes' point of just saying, I think we do really need to work as a team to kind of fight to recognise the pavilion in the same status. You saw the examples in my presentation of V&A Dundee, of Tate St Ives, and it's really important along with our colleagues along the coast. And I think we want to also fight to survive for our communities. There's a big venue in Gateshead that receives a lot of funding, that has similar visitor numbers for us, but which is open. A lot of people want us to be open in the evening. I really understand that, and if we can get there, we will. But this venue's only open 4 days a week. That's in a major city because of the pressures on funding. And I think we really need to fight together to fight against that and to try and secure the funding as things go forward, be it from Arts Council or Unitary or mayoral authority, to make sure that us and the Brighton Dome and Chichester are protected as cultural assets and support the wider community. So it's a challenge, and we'll continue to work through with Lorna to see whether there's creative solutions too. Thank you.
Yeah, I was looking at an exhibition in the Brighton Museum. I thought, I'll go over on a Monday. It's not open on a Monday. It's not open on a Tuesday either, I don't think. So that'd be a Wednesday or Thursday or Friday. With that, I'll say thank you to Stuart, thank you to Sally Ann, thank you to Charlotte. Isn't it? Patricia, sorry. Apologies for your time this evening, and good luck going forward, and we'll all wait and see what happens in the future.
And thanks for your time, and thanks again for planning. It's really brilliant.
And we have got a recommendation, I've been told, so that's be resolved, the performance report of the Chief Executive Officer of the Dillawall Pavilion Trust be noted. Someone happy to move that? Councillor McGurk, seconded. Councillor John Barnes.
I always hate noting something. Can we not welcome it?
All right, we're note to welcome it. All those in favour? That's carried unanimously. Thank you very much, Stuart. Thank you very much, team. Thank you.
Thank you.
Right, moving on. Item 6, Housing Renewal Financial Assistance Policy, pages 49. Report of Richard Parker Hardy, Head of Service Environmental Services. Purpose of the report: consider and recommend a Housing Renewal Financial Assistance Policy Disabled Facilities Grants to Cabinet for approval, and onward recommendation for adoption by full council. Officer recommendation be resolved that the Housing Renewal Financial Assistance Policy 2026 be recommended to Cabinet for final approval and adoption by full council. I understand Joanne's coming up with this one. Joanne.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Joanne Cobby. I'm a Senior Environmental Health Officer in the Private Sector Housing Team within Environmental Health. And I'm presenting the Housing Financial Assistance Policy, hopefully to take it through to 2029. This is a renewal of the policy that we have to have in place to enable us to have mandatory and discretionary disabled facilities grants across Rother. The main change in our policy is the increase of the discretionary grant from 30,000 to 40,000. And this is really just to reflect the increase of the costs for our complex cases, such as extensions and through-floor lifts and specialist equipment. We have a limit of 30,000 on our mandatory DFGs, our disabled facilities grants, which is set by legislation. So when we have a complex case that goes into funding that's needed beyond that, we have we top it up with a discretionary grant. So it's looking at hopefully taking the more complex cases through a little bit further. The funding for both comes from our allocation of the Better Care Fund, which is paid to East Sussex County Council and then allocated out, but it's essentially coming from central government. Other than this, we've got very little change in the policy, but we have attempted to make it clearer and provide more detail on how we do the general discretionary grants, mainly to help the clients and colleagues that we work across East Sussex with, to show that we are reflecting what our neighbouring authorities are doing as well, and hopefully that makes it easier for working practices and assist in the future as we look at joining up. So that's pretty much it.
Okie dokie, thank you. Councillor Burton, I think this was your field of work, so I'll let you say something.
Yes, thank you. Yes, it was my field of work. So, yeah, I understand totally where you're coming from financially. That would give you much more scope for the bigger jobs. I can understand that. There was a slight typo. Have you had that in Appendix A? Did you mention that, Councillor Osborne? Okay. Can I come back to that? Here we are. Under Appendix A, under Dementia Assistance, you need to change it round. Anyone diagnosed with dementia by a professional.
No worries.
Little typo there. But my main point is in the document, and I appreciate you're talking about finances, but nowhere is there any customer service user feedback. So there are people that are probably not eligible and what they feel about that and how the process went. And I think anything we're going to move forward and progress, it's always useful to have some service user feedback enclosed in a future document. Or you may know it off the top of your head.
I don't know it off the top of my head, but I do know that from the East Sussex occupational therapy team have been looking at getting more feedback. They're bringing it all together essentially, so that we will know a little bit more than we have done in the past.
Councillor McGurk.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks for the explanation. Really interesting to see disabled facilities grant being increased, and it's part of a sort of general direction in they've always been part of a direction towards people being supported to be independent within their own homes, to avoid, reduce and delay people coming forward to formal social care and healthcare. Has there been an overall increase in funding for DFGs by local authority, do we know? Is that why the individual amounts have increased from 30 to 40,000?
I think last year they received, or was received, 2.1 million, and then this year it's been 2.2 million. So it is going up ever so slowly. It does reflect what we spend, so our allocation will reflect what we've done the previous year. So the more we spend, the way it's working at the moment is the allocation spreads out. So at the moment we are running on spending what we get, and that's going quite well. So I hope that helps.
Thank you. I've just found the bit that Councillor Burton, just in case anyone's slightly lost. It's on page 60, and the eligibility, anyone diagnosed by a professional with dementia, which doesn't read very well because it sounds like the professional's got dementia. So if you slight tweak required there.
I didn't want to actually read it out, Councillor.
No, I thought I would. So just in case anybody's sitting at home thinking, what are they on about? Anyone diagnosed by a professional with dementia. Well, that would be unfortunate, wouldn't it? Councillor Clark.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to highlight the importance of the disability grants, because I'm aware of 6 residents in my ward at Pebs in the last 2 years who have had adaptations. They've had a wet room and a stair lift, and I think that comes down around about £10,000. But if they was unable to be supported and they went into a nursing home or something like that, that'd be swallowed up in a matter of months. So you're actually saving adult social care a lot of money by allowing people to keep their independence. A lot of them also on the lifeline system where they can get assistance immediately. So, yeah, it's a very important aspect of care in the community. It really is.
And John, Councillor Barnes?
Yes, 2 of the points that I wanted to make have already been made, so I won't repeat them. In a way, I'm not quite sure whether it's for this body or for a county-wide body to be assessing performance here. But Councillor Clark's point is a very important one, because both in terms of people discharged from hospital and people with permanent disabilities, we're well catering for people. Some of us are getting older, getting less mobile. Do we have to move, or can our homes be adapted so we stay in them? This can be a saving of money to the health service in particular, but to the public purse generally. But I'm not sure, and I was slightly looking for it. This is all about the policy. It's not really about the results. And I'm crucially aware of somebody who was, after a very bad car accident, was helped to stay in his own home, and has since been working for a disability charity, encouraging the disabled back into work. And it's that kind of result which I think makes this policy so important. But I get no sense, I can see the numbers for the last year because they're in Appendix B, but I get no kind of benchmarking feel how we compare with other similar populations, and whether the scale of our help is going up, whether it should be going up if you benchmark it against other authorities that are comparable. Maybe that's for county and not for us, but it would have been useful, I think, to have had something about that in the report. Thank you very much. The work itself is enormously valuable, and I do congratulate those who take part in it.
Do you have any explanation on that, Joanne, or not, maybe?
To be honest, it's very much that it was all on the finance side of things as opposed to anything else. That information is out there, and we can work with the colleagues in East Sussex to pull it together and let you know, if you really want to know, how it's going. I think the team has done really well in the last year in actually pulling together to go from more of an old-fashioned paper system into the digital age. They've worked really well with that, and their results really do match the other local authorities in the area, if not excel them. So I think it's easy for me to say that without the data in front of me, but they're doing very well indeed.
Excellent. Councillor McGurk.
Yeah, quick comment on that. There should be quite a lot of information in things like the Joint Strategic Needs Assessment at a county level, where a lot of that information from the BCF, from Health and Social Care, will be sort of brought together around performance. The sort of prevent, reduce, delay kind of agenda is important, as everyone's sort of noted today. That's where all of the savings, really, the important savings, will be made, and that's the strategy which is going to deliver the majority of a lot of savings. So there will be performance information around that available.
Okay, someone want to move this? Our recommendation is resolved that the Housing Renewal Financial Assistance Policy 2026 be recommended to Cabinet for onward approval and adoption by full council. Councillor Burton, happy to move. Seconded. Councillor John, all those in favour? Carried unanimously. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Richard. Item 7. Draft Budget Challenge Proposals 2026-27, pages 75 to 88. Report of the Deputy Chief Executive, Andrew Vallance. Officer recommendation resolved that this committee consider the proposals incorporated into this paper, including the schedules of Appendix A, B and C, recommend them to Cabinet for inclusion in the public consultation for the 26-27 budget, and note the contents of the report, including the challenging financial position and need to identify further savings ahead of the budget setting the budget for 26-27. Andrew.
I'm going to hand over to Charlotte, who produced this report.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Andrew. Yes, we commenced the budget process a tad earlier, well, quite a bit earlier this year, with the intent of aiding kind of discussion and planning and consultation, particularly around the proposals. As the report says, and you'll have heard me say previously at this committee, the funding landscape does remain challenging, with a number of unknowns still at the moment. This committee had an update at its last meeting on our in-year position, and noted at the time that the reserves in 25-26, the current financial year, could be reduced to 2.7 million in year. You also previously considered the policy around flexible capital receipts and our intention to utilise that government policy, which provides us with flexibility to aid efficiency and transformation of services, and that will be a feature of our budget for next year as well. As I've said in the report, the statutory duties of the local authority in terms of the stewardship of public funds and reserves remain regardless of the local government reorganisation picture, and the auditors have been very clear and explicit about that position. So, as I said, the wider funding picture does remain unknown. I've highlighted in the report what we understand of the fair funding review, and that consultation closed in August. We await the outcome of that consultation. And of course, our real own council's position is only known once we receive the local government finance settlement. That is likely to be very close to Christmas this year. The good thing about that settlement, once we receive it, is that we will have a 3-year funding settlement, which will provide us with much more certainty than we've had for a long time in local government. So our focus at the moment, whilst we await all of that information, has been internally at our own budgets. And so early in the summer, the heads of service were all targeted with finding 10% of their gross budgets. As you'll be aware, the 25-26 budget was set utilising £694,000 of reserves. So we needed to find that 694,000 before we even considered any additional growth that this year may throw at us. And as you know, some of our services are demand-led and naturally will create their own challenges in year. So the heads of service were targeted with finding 10%. They were asked to RAG rate their proposals so that those considering them subsequently had additional information about the deliverability of those proposals and the impact of them also. They've been considered by a panel and by lead members already, and the portfolio holders have had input into the process as well. And the proposals of that process to date are outlined in Appendix A, B and C. So Appendix A covers all of the savings proposals. and there are £687,000 worth of savings proposals on the table there for 26-27. Appendix B covers the unavoidable growth pressures that we anticipate facing in 26-27. That's just shy of £500,000 of revenue expenditure. And Appendix C covers the headlines of the potential fees and charges changes that we would put out to consultation if members are minded to support. I won't run through all of those appendices line by line because, of course, there's a lot of detail and members will have had the opportunity to have a look, and we'd be happy to take any questions. Just in terms of kind of next steps, our intention is, after scrutiny have considered the proposals, we'll take scrutiny's feedback to Cabinet on the 3rd of November, and immediately after Cabinet, we will start the public consultation and run it for the whole of November and into December to get the public's views. As you'll be aware from the recommendations themselves, we will need to find more. What we have on the table here is unlikely to be sufficient for us to close that baseline funding gap of 694 and the potential impacts of the fair funding review. So at the moment, I'm doing some work separate to this on an update to the medium-term financial strategy, which of course I'll bring to this committee as soon as it's finalised. Fair funding reform and the local government settlement will continue to add to that picture of information that we have. But of course, we can't leave things until January to take some proposals forward. So this is kind of the first iteration for this budget cycle. There will be more information to come forward. And then the final thing I just wanted to say is I've been very kindly joined by a number of my head of service colleagues this evening and some online, and also some portfolio holders have also been able to join us to support the discussion around the proposals, should you wish to have a debate about them. So yeah, I'll leave it there, Chair, and happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Well, Deborah's here because she's got a gold star for savings in her department, I think. So it's possibly just as well Stuart's left, given a sort of proposal to trim his grant over a couple of years, which obviously is a difficult thing, as he sort of explained. One grant feeds another grant, and if one drops, then the other one might drop, and then you're in a perpetual downward spiral potentially. So difficult decisions to be made. Who wants to kick off then? Councillor Clark.
Yes, I've just been reading proposal to reduce agency support by one officer within the benefits team. This is likely to result in some increase in processing times. That just shows you what a difficult position we're in. Because I've always taken great interest in this subject. Sometimes the claims can't be processed as quick as one because you get a lack of information from the applicant, and they might not want to let you know their bank account and that sort of thing. But it would concern me if that suddenly leapt and people waiting another month or so for their benefits to be processed. So it's a red light, because you already said it might increase waiting times, but that really does concern me that we've got to that stage. It really does.
Go on then.
Thank you, Chair. Just to say, so at the moment, our revenues and benefits team is supported by the use of an external agency who provide skilled revenues and benefits staff. Benefits officers particularly take a long time to train, and around about 18 months at least to train and become fully skilled. So we use this agency to provide fully skilled staff, and that is what helps us maintain our processing time. However, they are naturally more expensive than appointing a permanent member of staff. So the proposal here is that we try to recruit externally and reduce our dependency on that relationship. But it does come with a challenge. There is a financial gain, but yeah, it's important that we highlight to you the potential risks of doing so. So we wouldn't actually have a reduction in headcount in that instance, but we would have a potential reduction in skills, because we're very unlikely to pick up a fully trained benefits officer in that process. We might, but it's unlikely.
Councillor McGurk.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, with on costs, it doesn't always work out that way, but yeah, obviously that's the input, the only way to go. I just noticed one of the proposals for savings is to cut just over £1,000 worth of funding to Rye Harbour Nature Reserve. It's not in my area, sorry, Councillor Osborne, Chair. But it just made me think, and obviously I realise we have to make incremental savings, and you know, it's important to have a bit here and a bit there. But the impact that might have on the nature reserve is going to be quite, you know, it could be quite severe. And I was wondering, you know, do we fund the nature reserve in other ways, or is that our sole contribution? Because for a relatively minor part of our savings programme, it might have a disproportionate effect on the nature reserve. So that was my question.
That budget actually rests within Mike's area, so I don't know if he's able to answer any more. I'm not aware of any other funding that we provide to that particular body. If I'm incorrect about that, I'll clarify it after the committee. I'll double check tomorrow, but as far as I'm aware, that's the only grant that we offer to that particular body. I don't know, Mike, if you want to add anything.
No, that's my understanding as well, and we'll confirm after the meeting if that's not correct. The only other point I would say is that we last made a payment to Rye, to this particular, to the Sussex Wildlife Trust, I think it was about 3 or 4 months ago, so there is some notice here as well involved. I know it's not ideal, but it's not an immediate cut, if you see what I mean. There is sort of 7 or 8 months notice here. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Barnes, John.
Yes, I too was worried about Rye. We're in danger, it seems to me, to cut off our nose to spite our face, because technically we get more out of this than we're contributing. We have a representative on the management committee. In fact, he's the long-term chair of the management committee. We foreshore, which is our responsibility, is taken within the nature reserve and managed as part of the nature reserve. I really think this is an ill-informed saving. Were it much larger, I think that's a slightly different point. But really, it seems to me this is a trivial saving, and I would be worried what would happen, because we are a stakeholder in the Rye Harbour Nature Reserve. And for a stakeholder not to make any contribution whatsoever, which is effectively what we're doing, how on earth do we regard ourselves as being a stakeholder? Or can we justify retaining our place on the management committee? I think it needs to be carefully thought about, and I would ask the Chief Executive to reconsider that one. I think most of this makes very good sense to me. Yeah. I hope very much we will continue to acquire houses, because I think the worry about continued homelessness, given what is happening to house prices, I think, is very real. The one which left me feeling slightly uneasy, not necessarily because it's unjustified, but because I didn't understand the justification, was the one for an additional housing enforcement officer, and to some extent the even larger sum that we're going to spend on environmental health. on human relations. That's probably one of the single largest growth items. And I think will need some justification to the public because they almost regard the public sector as having a fetish about HR. I'm afraid, and I'll be perfectly blunt. So if you're going to invest money there, and it may well be justified, I think it will need to be very carefully justified, because otherwise I think you will get a public kickback. Thank you very much.
Thank you, John. I suppose you could argue that potentially in 2 years' time we wouldn't have a seat on the board because we wouldn't exist at Roy Harbour Nature Reserve. And I was actually down there last Tuesday morning, going for a walk, and it was rammed. It was really busy. By the time I left, it was really busy. So I'm glad I went down early and got in a caf quick. Just on the sort of Appendix C, the discretionary fees and charges, sort of couple here. One's in my patch, it's Canberra, and it's the sort of perennial gripe that Canberra businesses have of the summer tariffs starting on the 1st, I think it's the 1st of April, to catch Easter, which sometimes is March and sometimes is April and is generally wet and horrible, and then nothing much happens for the rest of the month, and then no one turns up in May except for a bank holiday, which is usually wet. Whether that can be moved, would we make more money by charging less, if you know what I mean, up to say the beginning of June? Would there be more inducement for people to go down on a marginal day just to take the dog for a walk and pay to park for 3 hours as opposed to 1 hour and moan all the time they're out? Would you get more out of that? Bulky waste charges, I assume, you're got to increase to cover costs. People would say, well, that increases fly tipping. So arguably, I wouldn't think so. Those who are going to fly tip are going to fly tip, end of, aren't they? Most people do the right thing and pay for a collection or take it to the dump themselves, and those who won't. That's it. One that I really can't see the point of personally is the sponsored walk on RDC Lounge charging 25 quid for an administration fee. It seems a bit tight on their behalf. I know there's potentially a cost, but could anybody just rock up and do a sponsored walk without telling us? But that's it. You probably spend more time driving out on a Sunday morning, paying overtime, trying to enforce the 25 quid. So I know it's a difficult thing. We got to look at everything. Parking charges introduced at Beeching Road car park and Bexhill Leisure Centre. I thought they already was, but there it is. Charging for RV parks, recreational vehicles. Don't know. Could be an idea. Got to set up electric and toilet connections, I suppose, or whatever. I'm not sure. But yeah. Any other thoughts, anyone? Sue?
Yeah, I was also going to mention the bulky waste charges, and I'm not sure I felt quite the same, that the more expensive we made it, the people might be lazy, but I hear your point of view. What I didn't understand was what the 4.75 to 7% meant. How much are we talking about now? And then I've got another question after that for Mike's team. I don't know what that could somebody explain to me. Deborah, could you explain what the 4.7 to 7% recovery, what that means to people?
Yes, I'll do my best. Bulky waste costs are split into different amounts. So you pay a certain amount for up to 3 items, which is the most popular range that people use most. So we've benchmarked all our fees and charges, and we try to keep it so that it covers the cost of removing them, alongside, as people have already mentioned, encouraging people to use it rather than fly tip. So the 4.75 is at the lower end, but then you do have people who want to do add on and do more, 8 or 12, and that's slightly more expensive. But, 90% is the 3 items at that lower price. Yeah.
So basically, 3 items is 4.75 increase you're suggesting?
Yes.
Yeah, thank you. That makes sense. Well, that's the debate about whether you think it's a demerit or not, but that you need to do the 4.7 to cover your costs, is what you're saying.
Yes, as a minimum, yes. Yeah. Costs and administration, that sort of thing. Yeah.
And my second question was about planning and whether retrospective planning applications were charged more than if it was a normal timely planning application. Has that ever been considered, and does that happen now?
Thank you, Chair. The government have discussed doing that at various points, but it's not the case at the moment, no. I would like it to be, but it's not the case at the moment. Thank you, Chair.
All right, so that's not a decision that we can take. That's a government. Okay. Interesting. Charlotte.
Thank you. Just to add a little bit, if you're interested in actual hard numbers, so at the moment the up to 3 items for bulky waste is £42.75. It would take it to £45. So that's the 4.75% increase. 4 to 6 items is currently 84, would take it to 90, so that's the 7% increase applied. So, I mean, I could read them all, but, you probably get the gist of what that looks like.
They're not going to think, I'll flight it now. It's gone up. They're not going to think that. I understand.
Yeah. I mean, just in terms of a few of the other points, the additional housing enforcement officer, so it isn't reflected in the paperwork there in front of you, but just to say, that's actually the net cost. So the cost, including all long costs associated with that post, we anticipate to be around 60,000. There will be an income stream funding 30,000 of it. It relates to the new private sector housing legislation, which I'm sure Richard could talk much more beautifully than I can about the sponsorship administration fee. So my understanding, again, Deborah may be able to add a bit more, is that currently there's no option for that in our fees and charges schedule. So when we're approached for it, our current option available to us is to offer the individuals the kind of offer them the not-for-profit event charge, which is £84, and obviously that puts a lot of events off because they don't wish to pay the £84. So the intention is to introduce this new charge, which is much lower, so that those sponsored walks can go ahead. The RV parks is still very much in its infancy of idea, and there is work happening in the background to flesh that out a bit more fully into a proper business plan to see whether it could be taken forward any. I think that covers most of the points.
So ultimately, the proposed 25 quid sponsored walk is good news. So if anybody's reading that, it's good news. It was 84, it might now be 25 quid. So if you ring up and you want to do a sponsored walk, instead of being told it's 84 quid and you say, oh, get that, you say 25 quid, yeah, of course I'll have that. So we'll have a bonus. Right, well, we're on a positive. Councillor McGurk.
Thanks, Chair. I skate over the fact that we started a sponsored walk for Greenways Sussex from a rather car park a few weeks ago. But Anyway, one thing I'd wondered about, and I didn't see anything in the report, was the income we get, the charges we make for filming as part of the 1066 partnership, whatever that's called, the media filming thing. Because we see, you know, a lot of it in our area, and is there scope to increase charges by potentially a significant amount? I mean, you know, recently in Rye we had a few days where the town was, well, the middle of the town was closed, looked brilliant, but a lot of local people made some money from filming in their houses, and there were charges associated with that. I just wonder how much we've explored that opportunity.
I think Deborah have it. I think it's a partnership with Hastings, where it always used to be. So, Deborah, you know the score.
Right, thank you, Councillor. Yes, it is a partnership, very much biased towards us, actually. We get the majority of the income from the filming, but they do, between these four walls, a lot of the work. So we do pretty well out of it. And I can assure you, we are in contact with them a lot of the time, and we get as much as we can from that income. But it's a bit like trying to kill the golden goose. People will go elsewhere. I know there are rich film companies, a lot of them, but a lot of them are small individuals as well and small promoters, and they will go elsewhere if we charge too much. It's very much on a negotiated basis, and yeah, I can assure you we make the best of it we can. Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Barnes, John.
I don't think I really had a comment on S12, where we're proposing to save the 1,050 on the Rye Harbour Nature Reserve. I really wonder whether it's... I really am disturbed by this saving. We are a partner in a reserve. It's administered on our behalf. It has a very powerful Friends organisation. They've built a discovery centre. It is a very important part of our sea defences. It's also an extremely important nature reserve nationally for avocets and various other seabirds. And it seems to me to cut off, which is, I think, the only grant we give them, is really a very retrograde step. And I would press you hard for a comment on that, if you're going, how you're going to defend it.
Do you want to have a go at that, save Mike?
Well, I don't know what discussions we've had with them and what difference this grant makes. It is quite a small grant. I'd hope that we are a stakeholder regardless of the grant. I don't know what the implications are of having a seat at the table if that grant were taken away, and that's something I think we can go away and find out. Of course, we have a consultation on the budget, so you know if that's going to cause a lot of harm, then I'm sure we would hear about that. I just don't know how significant that is in terms of their other funding, or whether actually, I mean, you know, really, we've had to dig really, really deep to get these savings. And
I recognise that, but it's symbolic either way. It's not going to do an enormous amount of harm, but as something which is probably one of the most important tourist and nature locations in Rother, I think as a symbolic gesture, this will cause far more reputational damage than actual damage.
If I may come back, I think we're at the stage now where, you know, I do hear what you say, Councillor Barnes, but, you know, we're cutting back on statutory services. You know, we're getting back to the bare bone, the minimum of what we can safely spend. So I do hear what you say, but I think there's other things like this that are going to come forward that we're going to have to look at. I appreciate it's only £1,000, but as I say, we will listen to the feedback. There was one other point I did want to come back on, and that was with HR. And we have a very, very small team in HR. I think we've struggled on for many, many years with a really tiny team. And with LGR, they're facing their most significant challenge. So I think that additional growth there in the team, and Anna's nodding as the head of service, is most needed. So that's why.
But just on the HR, it's not that I'm querying the need. I think it's the importance of getting the public defence in early, because you mentioned local government reorganisation. That is probably the most significant challenge that HR is going to face over the next 3 years. I think it's perfectly justifiable investment, but I think it will need to be defended in those terms.
Okay, Councillor McGurk.
Just agreeing with Councillor Barnes, and you made the point about avocets. I remember when I was a kid, avocets being so rare, and the first time I saw one was at Rye Harbour Nature Reserve, and it was quite an emotional moment. A ridiculous thing to say, but it was. But can we make a formal request, Lorna, for that decision to be reviewed, that particular part of the savings proposals, and particularly if the settlement due in December or January offers some opportunities, that is reversed if there's a chance, but reviewed in the meantime. Is that a... Yeah.
Might be a bit of lobbying of your cabinet members required. And avocets live in the field opposite my house. Yep, loads of them. So, anybody else got any proposals? Mary Barnes, Councillor Barnes?
Well, actually, I'm kind of going off on a limb on this one, but it is actually one of my major preoccupations and concerns about what's going on in the rural area where we have a building development. I have mentioned this to the head of planning, so to him this is not going to be a surprise. We really do need to find a way of stopping the enormous amount of money that's going to the farmers who are receiving all this land, this soil, and finding a way in which it can be profitably disposed of in other places. I have no solution. I just want to make everybody that I can possibly make to hear. This is a huge concern of mine because it is ruining those parts of the AONB where it's happening. It's happening in my patch, in Councillor Colleen's patch. It is spoiling the beautiful, serene valleys of particularly Hurst Green and also parts of Ticehurst, where this huge, but I can't emphasise how much, huge amount of tipping is going on. The farmers are all benefiting hugely, and it is to the detriment of beautiful parts of our heritage. I'll leave you with a thought, but I am really, really concerned about it. So, if you want to take that away, think of ways in which the people who are doing the tipping can possibly be charged exorbitant amounts of money for what they're doing. But, for example, the whole of the Lilybank development finished up on a farm in Hurst Green. All the digging out went to that, and it's completely altered the landscape. And I think if I keep on saying this often enough, somebody's going to say, yes, we must stop it. So, over to you, really.
Environment Agency. Environment Agency.
No one wants to take complete responsibility for it. It's everyone who applies does so through some sort of certificate to say, yes, they're just going to smooth out a bank or something. But when thousands of tonnes are actually put over what is the public sewer through a valley in Hurst Green, it's time we did something about it.
So again, Environment Agency, they're not the best. Look at Hodes Wood in Kent. So there it is. Mike.
Thanks, Chair, and Councillor Barnes and I have discussed this, as she correctly identified. I mean, there will be some occasions when it may need planning permission, and this issue of soil being put on sites is something that we're seeing across the South East region, actually, and we all know that the difficult straits that farming is in this country at the moment. What I would say is that where it happens, we need to raise an enforcement case, have a look at it and see if it needs permission, and then see if it's causing harm. Not all cases will obviously cause harm as well, so it's very much assessed on a case-by-case basis. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Right. Did I see you indicate, Councillor Burton?
Actually, then I thought as a small point, as Councillor McGirt reminded me, we did have a walk that began on Rother District Council land, and but it wasn't actually a sponsored walk. So maybe the wording should be sponsored or fundraising walk on the document.
Right. Okay. Right. We've got a recommendation to come up with here. Would we come up with anything?
I think the review of the Rye Harbour grant. Do you want to read that out?
I think we actually ought to welcome the efforts that have been made, even though we're asking for one small bit to be reviewed, because I think this is a very substantial step towards a balanced budget, and I think we should be seen to endorse that.
Yeah. Well, if we're going to do that, would you have or Lindsay have any data on the car parking in Canberra, on the usage sort of in the sort of slow season, if you know what I mean, sort of when the price goes up? I better do my job as a ward member. Deborah.
Thank you, Councillor. Yes, Lindsay has done a lot of work on researching whether having an earlier summer, I've got to get the words right, an earlier summer season start with an interim payment and a longer season end with an interim payment, and it worked out that we would lose money. And we didn't want to lose money, basically. And we did it on ticket sales in the different times of the year, and also car park occupancy as well. So it was a detailed study, and we came to the conclusion that we wouldn't benefit from it, but we would actually probably lose money on it. So we've stuck with what we're doing at the moment.
That's fine. I've asked the question, I've got an answer. And I did think it was that. I remember seeing something a few years ago, and we had a lot less. The villages get annoyed with the village being clogged up. So we sort of changed some things a few years ago. So less people went into the centre of the village, but the income actually went up. So because the price was there, and people aren't driving into it, but it worked itself out in the end. I think that's probably it then, isn't it? But
Chair, if it assists, just in terms of the officer recommendations and paragraph 1 in relation to that, Chair, given the discussion, you may want to consider the amend, which would read, consider the proposals incorporated into this paper subject to reviewing S12 and recommend to Cabinet for inclusion in the public consultation for the 2026-2027 budget.
And congratulate the officers on the efforts.
Yep. You happy with that addition, John? Yeah. Everybody happy with that? Thanks to the officers online who have sat there and not been asked any questions, and everybody else who's turned up. Thanks for your efforts. Did I have a mover and a seconder? John to move, Simon to second. All those in favour? That's carried unanimously. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, everybody. Last one, item 8, is the work programme. I've got one here to add to the work programme for January, Rotherham lease accommodation policies, which we'll add to January. And I think there was one from council plan update, which was November the 17th. That will also probably come to the January meeting on the 26th. Apart from that, it's pretty much there. And at the moment, we're looking at the 2704 will be the online meeting. There's only a couple of items there at the moment. We can do that from Teams. So if everybody's happy with that, yeah, cool. Well, what I will do then is declare the meeting closed at 7:50, 10 to 8. Thank you very much for your attendance. Safe journey home. Thank you very much.